Along with this refresh theme from the planning team, we knew we wanted to talk about that theme and what it meant for us as the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. But the ELCA is also a part of the Lutheran World Federation, all these Lutheran churches around the world. And so, along with our presiding bishop being with us to talk about the ELCA, we have another guest who is with us to talk about what it means to be Lutheran and Christian globally. And I'd like to ask Dr. Phil Ruge-Jones to come and make that introduction now.
Uno aviso antes, hay dos mesas redondas donde se puede tener traducción de inglés a español durante toda la conferencia. If you didn't understand that, you don't need to know it. So, we're talking about you, people. Es un gran placer presentar a ustedes el secretario general de la Federación Luterana Mundial, Martin Junge. It is my pleasure to present to you the Secretary General of the Lutheran World Federation, Martin Junge. Trabajamos juntos como jovencitos, proclamando el Evangelio en la comunidad de los fieles en Chile. We worked together when we were yet young, proclaiming the gospel in the community of the faithful in Chile. El secretario general guía la misión de la Oficina de la Comunión, facilitando a las relaciones entre los diversos miembros de la federación, apoyándoles en su camino y su testimonio. The Secretary General guides the mission of the Office of the Whole Communion, facilitating relations between the diverse members of the Lutheran World Federation and strengthening them, supporting them in their walk and their testimony. También es el director de nuestro trabajo ecuménico al nivel global. He's also our chief ecumenical officer on a global level. Y así es, entonces, les presento a mi amigo, a mi hermano en Cristo, a un hombre de gran compromiso al Evangelio y al reino de Dios, Martin Junge. And thus it is that I present to you my friend, my brother in Christ, a man committed to the gospel and to the reign of God, Martin Junge. Please welcome him.
There are two mics. Okay, like this. Good afternoon, buenas tardes. It's a great joy to be with you during these days as you engage in discussions to refresh. It's a beautiful theme, and the beginning was so encouraging already. To speak about the Lutheran World Federation, we saw some of it already. 5 months ago, I was in Slovakia, visiting the church and visiting part of the ministry of the church. They have schools. And they have kept a tradition which is a very strong tradition in that part of the world, which is the bell choirs. Everybody holds a bell with a different size, therefore also with a different tone. And they come together and they play. And they play beautifully. Beautiful tunes, just by pulling the people together, each one with his or her distinctive bell. And when I saw that image 5 months ago, I felt like saying, yes, this is the Lutheran World Federation. Statistics are easily said. It's 145 churches in 98 countries, bringing together 75 million. But what does it mean? I think the fundamental part is that we have been brought together to be one body, each one with his or her distinctive bell. So you do as ELCA. bringing your distinctive bell into that orchestra. So is the church in Peru doing. So is the church in Costa Rica doing. So are churches in Africa, in Asia doing. Coming together, and we would miss each bell if it wouldn't be there, because the tune which we have to sing, the witness which we want to offer, requires of each of the bells. It is a challenge sometimes to play together. From my own history, my father was a conductor in an orchestra. He told me once, you know, for being a good musician, you need to be able to do two things. You need to be able to play your instrument, but you also need to be able to listen to what's going around you. So if you just go with your instrument, knowing what you have to play, and you are not adapting to how the others are coming in, how one may have come a bit later, so that you also have to come later, then the whole orchestra falls apart. You need musicians who are able to play, and you need listeners who are able to listen how we are playing together. That's the LWF, the Lutheran World Federation, and we are grateful for your gifts, for your witness, for your bell. Let me continue using that image. For your bell that you bring into that melody, that tune we are playing. A tune of witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ. A tune of service. Lutheran World Federation serves 2.5 million refugees in the world at this very moment, on your behalf, with you, together as a global communion of churches. But then also a witness of reconciliation, of bridge building, of justice in the world. As part of it, I want to speak to you about the ecumenical work, which is part of this bridge building, which is part of this specific own contribution which we can offer as a witness in our world, and which I was asked to possibly speak about that during this first day, was so strongly present on October 31, 2016, when Lutherans and Catholics jointly commemorated the Reformation. Now I need to see. Yes, it's not. So I have prepared some slides, and I will speak to those slides. I will try to move quicker than the length of the presentation actually would mean, and I don't see any watch. Would you just give me a signal when it is 10 to 5, so that I finish, please, at 5 o'clock, so that we can then also continue with the discussion. So, ¿quién lo hubiera pensado? Who'd have thought so? That on October 31, 2016, we would have those images. Pope Francis and the leadership of the Lutheran World Federation coming together to jointly commemorate. This is important. Sometimes I read here and there, the Pope visited Lund, the Pope visited the Lutheran. No, we co-hosted a joint commemoration. We did it throughout, and you can see it already from the vestments. Who would have thought 5 years ago that this would happen? Who would think that we would be recognizing each other as equals? As you can see already by the vestments, who would have thought that we would wear the red color? October 31, red color. Who would have thought that Pope Francis would go and embrace Archbishop Antje Jacqueline from the Swedish church, thereby also deconstructing all that myth according to which churches who ordain women are somehow not credible in ecumenical dialogue or are messing up or making it impossible to proceed and move forward. Who'd thought that we would have even fun as we did and as you can see in the picture below. I don't want to tell the joke. It was a very good one, maybe later on. Okay, you want me to tell the joke. So, it was, Pope Francis, of course, got us a lot of attraction and attention, and there were many people trying to get his attention. Papa Francisco, many Latinos also, muchos Latinos ahí en Suecia. Papa Francisco, Papa Francisco. And he was standing on the front trying to not engage too much with all of that. But there was one lady, she was strong all the time. You want me to move closer here? Like this? Good. Who was trying to get his attention? Papa Francisco, and I was standing next to him and I could see he was trying to look elsewhere because you shouldn't be engaging like this. When that lady realized and knew how to get him, as all Latin Americans, also Papa Francisco is a fan of a football club, of a soccer club, which is called San Lorenzo de Almagro. So that lady stopped Papa Francisco, and then she shouted, San Lorenzo de Almagro, and the Pope immediately. So, and then I told him, now I know how to get your attention. So that was the joke at that moment. But let me move on now. So, I don't think I want to go too much into detail, although I was very grateful, Bishop Eaton, that in your sermon you went back to the basics and to the core, which I think we should always do. What is it all about? It is given to you. Give yourself a break. You also said it in a different way. I believe this message hasn't lost any of the relevance. It is because of God's merits. It is because of what God has done and who God is, not because of what we do or who we are, because of who God is and what God does, that we receive new life. Justification is given, offered to us. And receive this as a matter of faith. And very important, and that triggered the whole thing, this is not for sale. This is a gift. It is not for sale. And that was important 500 years ago, and I hope to speak on Wednesday more on that. It is equally important today. Everything is on the marketplace, meanwhile. And that is an overall tendency. It is also coming into the church. And at that time, Martin Luther said, this is not to put on the market. This is not to be traded. It's given, it's forgiveness, it's a gift. What I find very interesting all the time is that Luther had discovered that insight of justification by faith alone several years prior to 1517. He had written about that, he had taught his students, but only 1517 that whole thing came into the public. Why? Because Luther connected the theological insight to something which was happening around him. He saw people paying out of the little they had just to get that assurance that forgiveness is given to them. So this connection of theological production with life situation of human beings is extremely important to me. I'm not saying theological production is not important. Good that Luther could sit and think and write, but all of that was dormant until it got connected with the struggle of the people. So that connection, I believe, is extremely important. I move on. It was a beautiful insight, but things escalated. We use this table very much in order to analyze how conflict begins to escalate. This is important within congregations, this is important within churches, but this is also important in our world. And the conflict escalated, and we know how much happened around the Reformation, and particularly after Reformation, on violence, the division of the church, terrible wars on European soil, which we should not be diminishing in any way. So, and after all of this, a joint commemoration, how do we come with all of that history of division, also of violence? How do we come to engage in a joint commemoration? To me, it is very important to underline that that joint commemoration we had in Lund, Sweden, last year, it didn't come out of the blue. In some regions, Latin America being one of them, there had been a solid movement of joint witness of Catholics and Lutherans around the question of military dictatorship and human rights. So we got to know each other. Trust developed between us, and that constituted a basis upon which we could then also get to know each other and also relate to each other in much different ways. The other source is the theological dialogues. A cornerstone of what happened in Lund 2016 is the joint declaration on the doctrine of justification, which Lutherans and Catholics signed together in 1999. To me, this is very important to say, because the joint commemoration is not a kind of an enthusiastic movement to say, you know, let's forget about all of that, let's move on. It stands and it is rooted in a solid process of theological development, which led us to a point where we could recognize that the key issue that was under dispute in the 16th century could be considered as overcome by ways that the condemnations, mutual condemnations that were expressed, do not apply anymore today. So another very important situation that moved us forward is a decision of the LWF Council in the year 2012 that we should, LWF, should approach the Reformation anniversary with a spirit of ecumenical accountability. What does this mean? It means that we should be intentional in bringing in the ecumenical developments into that commemoration. It means that we should not, as we have a saying in Spanish, erase with our elbow what we had been written with our hands before. It means that, for instance, those theological dialogues, we would not be so eager to reconnect to the 16th century as if nothing did happen between us in the last 50 years, as if we did not change, as if the Catholics didn't change, and as if we didn't change together in our process. Ecumenical accountability. And I want to continue inviting wherever I go that we approach Reformation anniversary with this spirit. Let's not undo. Let's not fall critically back 500 years ago. Let's be intentional in bringing the ecumenical developments to the forefront. This is true in view of the Catholics. This is true in view of Mennonites. We had a reconciliation with Mennonites 7 years ago. How would you go and continue talking about the Anabaptists as if we didn't ask for forgiveness in 2010? That needs to be brought into the commemoration. The key text which we used for the joint commemoration is from conflict to communion. It is the first ever joint narrative about Reformation history, the disputes then, how we moved forward, and what still remains a difference. It is an honest document because it speaks about how we have moved, but it also declares where still differences are prevailing. And it is a document which we were intentional also in keeping in a way that it would be able, people would be able to read it in the pews. It is not a too sophisticated document. I want to encourage you, if you have time, to have a look at this document. Meanwhile, this document has been translated, this report, into several languages. I got just last week a copy of Japanese because we didn't even know. The churches in Japan picked it up and wanted to have their own translation. And so do we have into Estonian, into Hungarian, into Polish, and Portuguese, and many other languages, because churches feel this is important. This is something we need to know and to discuss. What is, in a nutshell, in this text? There is an expression of gratitude. It is not that we are making Reformation small. And you could see in the joint commemoration that Catholics and Lutherans, we can say together today, there is gratitude for the gifts that the Reformation has brought into the church and into the world. Pope Francis has been tremendously explicit. The translation of the Bible, it was mentioned today in view of the song. The centrality of Christ, grace, all of these issues have been mentioned. There is repentance because theological issues have led to human suffering and fragmentation of the church, and there is commitment to joint witness and to service. That's the same in Spanish, but it has been translated, I assume. Thank you. So, we wanted to have, I was asked, why did you do the joint commemoration in 2016 and not in 2017? Did you lack courage to do it in 2017? No, it was not that. We felt that for the sake of this ecumenical accountability, we needed to be sure that a year ahead, we give a strong global signal that this is the tune to which we want to continue singing. That's why we did it a year ahead, so that we could hopefully inspire similar actions in other parts of the world. And why did we do it in Lund and not in Germany or in Wittenberg or I don't know where? Lund is the birthplace of the Lutheran World Federation in 1947. And we felt it is appropriate also in view of a word that President Pedro Bullón has mentioned, in view of also underlining that Reformation is a global citizen today. We wanted to make sure to move it out from the historic place of Germany and to begin to move it as Reformation moved, actually, to the Nordics first. And in May this year, the assembly of the LWF will take place in Windhoek, Namibia, just as an underlining that this is how Reformation has moved. Why Namibia, I have been asked. Are you crazy? What are you going to do there? Well, did you know that Namibia is, next to Sweden, the country with the largest Lutheran population within the country, in the world? Namibia has 70% of its population is Lutheran. So why wouldn't you go to Namibia? You don't have that here. You don't have that in Sweden. You don't have that in Germany. Let's go to Namibia. It's plausible, I guess. This one I will leave. We had, and this I'm now coming towards the end. I'm speaking of Lund, but to us it was very important that the joint commemoration would include a liturgical celebration, as we did it in the Cathedral of Lund, but then we moved out to Malmö, which is a city 15-20 kilometers away, to a public arena where we gathered with some 10,000 people and we emphasized more on the witness side. So we felt, and this is very important to underline, we felt that unity or reconciliation, we are not yet united, but reconciliation and the unity of the church is not an end in itself. The church is meant to bring a message into the world. So we wanted to make sure that by coming together, we don't keep it in the walls of the church. We don't keep it among ourselves, but we make sure to connect it with the struggles and the hopes, the joys and the pains of the world. So we had the celebration in Lund with Bishop Munib Yunan, the president of the LWF, and Pope Francis sharing the peace with each other. And then we went to Malmö, to the arena, and there we had 4 witnesses speaking of their own situations, hopes, and struggles. She is Rose Nathike Lokonyen. She is a refugee in a refugee camp the LWF is running in Kenya. And it was very important. She had a witness, beautiful witness, sharing what it was for her to flee a country, what it was for her to be received, and how she had developed. Rose was one in the team of the refugees in the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. You can see that there. So she has made something out of her life, something good and something positive, and that witness of unity and mission, we wanted to be sure that we bring it together. I was astonished that as the news about that joint commemoration came out, the largest requests for interviews or for background information, they came from the secular press, not from the church press. So we didn't get many requests from church magazines to give an interview or to explain more, but the secular press, BBC, New York Times, and Al Jazeera, and Bishop Munib Yunan, the president of the LWF, just told me that last week he was interviewed for 1 hour by a TV station that is going to air that in Lebanon, that is going to broadcast that program to different parts of the world, particularly the Arab Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Oman, where the news of the joint commemoration will be told about. So I have been reflecting why. Why is the secular press so interested? And I think it is because the signal Lund gives in a troubled world. Sisters and brothers, I don't think there has been a time where people have had such hard time and communities to talk to each other. We are in times of corrosive, destructive language. Communities are not able to sit and talk. And Lund was another example. Communities are falling apart into small islands, affirming little identities, just to be sure who I am, because the world is so difficult. We made the opposite. So the 4 or 5 messages, which I think Lund were so important for the people outside, is yes, it is worthwhile to stick to dialogue. It is possible to leave conflict behind. Violence, also on religious grounds, is to be rejected. Troubled history does not exclude promising future, and there is power in reconciliation. I think we are entering times where churches will have to be profoundly counter-cyclical, counter-cultural, just living out the culture of the gospel, a culture which includes and does not exclude, a culture which brings us into a movement of reconciliation, not of building walls, a culture that brings us into looking into the wholeness of people and looking at their God-given dignity and value. I'm inviting in all places, I'm not saying that just here, I'm inviting in all places for churches to develop that countercultural, counter-cyclical identity. We have to offer a different word. We have to offer a different witness. We are needed in a time of fragmentation, of communication breakdowns, of corrosive messages and languages. And I think for this, the Lund event stood very powerfully. Where do we go from here? And then I want to finish. It has been a true blessing to see strong replication of what we did in Lund in many parts of the world. Pastor Pedro, in Peru, they did it also, a joint commemoration at their level. The same in Chile, in Brazil they are planning, in Japan they did, in Hong Kong they are doing, in many parts of the world this is picked up and they are doing. We are working, one of the agreements was to work together to serve the poor. We are developing pilot projects with Caritas Internationalis, and we want to go into deeper dialogues. The preconditions for this are very good. In this church, with the Catholics, you were able to develop the Declaration on the Way, which is an excellent document, which we will use as we go at a global level into a further stage. I'm keen to see how that document is lived out in your congregations and synods, just to understand its full potential. But the preconditions are also good because you don't imagine how much controversy we had around that cross. I want to present you, introduce to you the artist, Christian Chavarria, a Salvadorian, a refugee who was in Sweden and is now back. He painted it. And the controversy in our preparatory meetings, I don't want to go into too much detail, was above there, the Eucharistic table. And we're promising too much here by putting the Eucharistic table at the center of that cross, and we giving a message that we are not going to be able to deliver later on. That was a huge controversy. My position, if we are not able to have the Eucharistic table, at least as an eschatological hope, and to present it, then why are we talking? We need to keep that vision up. It is about people coming together around the table. This is, sisters and brothers, where people feel the pain of division the hardest. And this is something which we got into the focus of the last, the joint statement that was signed. I will read it in Spanish, as it is in English there. Muchos miembros de nuestras comunidades anhelan recibir la Eucaristía en una sola mesa, como una expresión concreta de la unidad. Experimentamos el dolor de aquellos que compartiendo todas sus vidas no pueden compartir la presencia redentora de Cristo en la mesa eucarística. Asumimos nuestra responsabilidad pastoral conjunta de responder a la sed y al hambre espiritual de la gente de querer ser uno en Cristo. Anhelamos para que esta herida en el cuerpo de Cristo sea sanada. Esta es la meta de nuestro trabajo ecuménico, la cual deseamos avanzar también al renovar nuestro compromiso, nuestro diálogo teológico. Thanks, I'm done. Yeah, I can.
We want to take the opportunity for about 15 minutes just to have some conversation in a group here. If you have any questions or things, do you mind passing a mic around? Yep. If you have a question, raise your hand, and Marcus will come find you. We're going to take about 15 minutes. Here we go.
Thank you for being here. Beautiful cross. We admired it when we watched the service in Lund. Is that available somehow? I mean, is Augsburg making copies of that available for congregations?
Not yet. I have seen it already. For instance, I was on Facebook seeing a worship in the church, in Lutheran church in Amman in Jordan. And I said, this cross I know. So we are working on it. We want to offer replicas, so to say, of that cross because it's meaningful, it's beautiful. It carries a strong message in itself.
Someone else? Raise your hand if you got a question. Here we go. Over on the side.
It's just a statement, completing the answer, I guess. Is that cross is pretty much available. Is a tradition in El Salvador to make this kind of cross. I have 2 of those, small, at home. I mean, it is available in any place. Again, not exactly the same because it's the art that matters, I think, right? That one that he painted was for that event, but there's so many of those crosses that is painted by different artists, maybe by him too, that it was everywhere.
Thank you. Where's our hand over here? There we go.
Thank you for your presentation and for bringing us together with a strong missional identity as we celebrate these 500 years of the Lutheran Reformation. My question is significantly framed by our United States context. We live in a time when the diversity of this country is exploding everywhere. Yet, in our church, that diversity, for different reasons, is not present. What could you share of the identity, the meaning, the challenge too, of the Lutheran Reformation for particular contexts like us in the United States? It will take only about 27 more years for the population of this country to be 50% white and 50% absolutely everything. So the question is one of mission, where the Reformation can connect with us at significant levels, and where other experiences of the church and the communion of the Lutheran World Federation could be significantly important and meaningful to us.
Yeah, thank you for that question. First of all, let me affirm what was mentioned also, how much your church has been part of the history of so many churches in the world. And I think as I lead the LWF as the General Secretary, there is a word from an African bishop, former president of the LWF in the 70s of last century, which continues inspiring me very much and connects a bit with the Bell story I said at the beginning. He said, there is no church so old, so rich, so well-resourced, that it wouldn't depend from others, from the gift of others. And there is no church so small, so underdeveloped in view of resources. That's not the right word. It's so under-resourced, you can say like that in English. So under-resourced that it wouldn't be able to bring gifts to others. I think you are in a unique opportunity as ELCA to draw from those relationships which are so strong. And I really want to affirm what you are doing by inviting your companion synods. And I believe also listening to the worship, knowing what global mission is trying to do, knowing what mission is trying to do, I sense and I believe that there is an eagerness to just be able to connect and to transcend. And I see important developments, at least from the outside, when it comes to the ELCA. Changes take time. And changes require patience. And changes also require that people walk together. I think you are looking for a church that was going to be able to include all the different expressions, historic and new, that is able to reach out. I would finally say that the whole example, and that I'm always trying to emphasize, of Jesus moving out, Jesus on his way, is something which should continue inspiring churches all over the world. Sometimes I hear we need to have churches with open doors and so on and so forth. No. We need to be able to move out of the church, to meet people where they are, to talk about life. The entry point of Jesus, if you read the Gospels, the entry points of Jesus in mission was never scriptures. He didn't begin with a sermon. It was always connecting to a life situation where he felt that something where the announcement of the kingdom of God fits perfectly. We need to be able to see those moments, those life realities, those community stories, the talk of the town, and connect. Churches need to be able to learn to listen before talking. The Emmaus conversation is the most beautiful paradigm for that. What is it that you are talking as you walk? For me, this is the entry point for a missional church. Listen first what the talk is, and then bring that message, which is your message. Maybe thus far.
Thank you. There in the back.
Are you aware of any plans for Eucharistic sharing anywhere during the coming commemoration this October?
Even if I would be aware, I would be very careful not to say it. No, let me say the following. Last week, a Finnish delegation was in Rome, in the Vatican, and they had a Lutheran delegation, and they had an audience with Pope Francis. And it was great. They came with two little children. I've never seen an audience with children. They did it. They came with children. And they said, in their lifetime, at the latest, this needs to happen. And I really want also to make it a point, and we have a pastoral duty. The church has always that tension within itself. That on the one hand, there is a teaching church. There are dogmas. There is doctrine. And that's good and that's important. At the same time, the church is called into a pastoral ministry among communities. And how do we bring that together? And that's why I'm so happy that we have now Eucharist as a kind of focus in our discussions. The differences which we have with the Catholics is church, ministry, and Eucharist. That's where we are not yet coming together. And the traditional setup of the discussion was to say, when we resolve our understanding of the church and of the ministry, the Eucharist will be possible. The joint commemoration has turned this a bit upside down and has said we have a pastoral duty as churches to respond to the differences which they have to respond to that hunger and thirst. Let me finish, I think we are running out of time, but let me finish with one biblical passage which has become very important to me in this very respect. It's Matthew 25. So Matthew 25, the judgment, or I don't know how you say that in English, el juicio final. First of all, to me it is so important, what is the last question we are going to be asked? What is the ultimate question? The ultimate question is going to be, did you clothe them? Did you give them to drink? Did you give them to eat? That's the question that is going to measure us. And to me, this has been working for quite some weeks and months already, and years. So how is it that as churches we say there is a spiritual and there is a terrenal bread, and the spiritual bread is the one that nurtures us? How is it that we are letting people go empty from the table? How do we connect it to that request that you are going to feed them? You are going to give them to drink. It sounds pushy, but I believe we are really pushed to give a pastoral response to families, as it's said in the statement, who share everything in their lives. There are couples who have been married, who share their table, share their house, share their lives, their dreams, education of their child. But when it comes to be nurtured in what grounds us in life, they have to go to separate tables. We have to realize what we are doing here. And I hope that is going to give us energy in view of finding a way that this is going to happen. Where is this going to happen, and is it going to happen in the next 1 year? I always say that, and I believe, that we need to rely very much on God, the Holy Spirit, and the inspiration which may come from there. And one thing I have learned in my life, don't give timelines to God.